I think a lot of this is going to depend on the right, because I do think that the tech companies had the mindset that you were describing, that if they aggressively basically took the positions and the stances that the Democrats wanted in the 2020 election, it would avoid regulation from the Democrats when they took power. It's not necessarily a super safe bet because the Democrats have their own grievances against tech, right? A lot of them think that tech doesn't censor enough, right?
Right.
And the Republicans think maybe it censors too much. But I think they run the risk by being so polarized towards the Democrats of actually radicalizing the Republicans. So I think that, when I wrote my most recent article for the Examiner about big tech and the Republicans, I asked Ken Buck's office about, a few years ago, he was not talking about breaking up big tech companies. He wasn't even interested in the topic. And he was like, yeah, I went to a field hearing and a bunch of my constituents were talking about Amazon and how it was, it was making it difficult for them to sell. And the Republicans are noticing what's happening to them, right? So it may be that if the Republicans change their political orientation enough, if they actually respond to events and not just respond with a bunch of slogans and mottos about tax cuts and deregulation, but if they actually see these companies as opposed to their base and they need to respond to their base, the next time they get enough power, they would conceivably be able to, either through legislation or through continuing to support people in the regulatory agencies, be able to create the majority for things like breaking up the large companies, imposing common carriage rules, which would help against a lot of the discrimination and censorship issues, interoperability so that different people, users from different companies can talk to each other. So, it won't be like, okay, I'm on a network with 500 people, so I can't talk to people who use Facebook. No, you still would with interoperability. So I think that a lot of it really is the ball being in the Republicans' court. There are enough Democrats, even though Democrats are more pro-censorship, who do want to address the power of these companies for one reason or another. And there are a growing number of Republicans. But I think as long as there's a core group of Republicans whose their mantra is basically to look at what's happening to their base and do nothing about it, which has been kind of the way they've responded to a number of social crises over the past, generation or so, then I don't think much will happen. But I do think that if somebody like a Josh Hawley or a J.D. Vance or some of these people on the right who are very enthused about this issue are willing to work with Democrats on the issue. Hawley supported Lena Khanna. He might have been the only Biden nominee that he supported, who's a very much to the left on this big tech issue. She probably wasn't the only one, but he voted against most of the nominees, so it was rare to see him support one. I do think if those people grow in influence and are able to make that argument to the base and mobilize that base against the establishment, then you'd really see movement on this issue. I think as long as you see one party that takes a complete laissez-faire attitude towards corporate concentration, which is what the Republicans have been doing, you're right, probably nothing will happen. But if they change their orientation and at least a few Democrats are willing to support some reforms, then I think something probably will happen.
I think we may see a reckoning with the Republicans in the midterms. 2016, Republicans had everything, and they did nothing. In fact, many of them supported the Russiagate investigation. Then 2018, the Democrats, recoiling from Trump, take the House back. Then Trump loses 2020. Joe Biden is now president. And we end up with people who are sick and tired of watching this problem of social media manipulation, big tech censorship, actually having a major influence on the election, like we mentioned, with suppressing negative news about Joe Biden's family. And now you have to wonder what's going to happen with the Republican Party. There's a lot of talk about a lot of right populists who are now running to primary existing Republicans or current Republicans. I think a lot of people keep saying, "Oh man, the Republicans are going to win the House in 2022 and they're going to push back." Maybe, but I also think we're going to see a lot of establishment Republican types, feckless, laissez-faire perhaps is the way you describe them. They do nothing, just whatever goes with these businesses. They're going to get ousted. I don't know for sure. I just think that the sentiment surely is there to not just have a sweep of the House, but also a changing of the guard in the Republican Party, because as it stands, we were mentioning this earlier in the show, Republicans don't do anything, at least right now, right? They're not coming out and saying we want to repeal firearms legislation. The left is saying we want firearms control. We want gun control. And the right's just saying no. Where is any semblance of a resistance saying we actually want to repeal some of that legislation? It doesn't exist. Then you have 2016 till today, with every Trump supporter knowing this was a problem going back to 2016, complaining about being banned, the censorship getting worse, and nothing getting done about it. Now all of these people are probably fed up. How stupid did Republican politicians have to be to ignore a problem that would result in them actually losing elections? So now you get Republicans replacing those people.
Let me tell you a story. So not only did I work in journalism, I worked directly in advocacy earlier in life. And, I was working for a progressive PAC in, I think it was around 2012, 2013, maybe a little bit after that. And I went to a progressive conference, and there was a bunch of people in a room from a range of progressive organizations. And they were all talking about protecting Social Security and Medicare. And I was like, guys, like, you can talk about protecting it all day long or whatever, but what you need to be doing is seizing the opportunity to talk about expanding these programs, right? This was 2012, 2013. Nobody was talking about doing this. I think starting 6 or 7 months later, there were members of Congress who started talking about doing it. There were other organizations who started doing that. And I think the Democrats really came to understand something, that if you can control the playing field of the debate and not be on the defensive, you've shifted things in your direction, even if you don't exactly get what you want. So now I think when someone like a Bernie Sanders talks about Medicare for all, it gets people excited about that. The chances of there being significant Medicare cuts, of raising the retirement age, of different types of privatization have gone down, because now the public debate is all about whether we should expand it or not, or instead of cutting it. So I think exactly what you just said, the lack of a proactive Republican response on so many different issues allows the Democrats to control the playing field. Yep. And if I were the Republicans, I would think it was a terrible strategy. But I think that's just been their go-to mode for so long, thinking that, if we'll just call the Democrats socialists and communists and gun grabbers, that'll win us every election, right? And that's just not the reality in this country anymore. There are a lot of people who are interested in a lot of progressive ideas, as I think they should be, because I think some of the progressive ideas are worthwhile and worth exploring. But as long as there's no response, the progressives, of course, are going to win the day, right? You can't just completely fall back to your slogans and your mottos from 40 years ago when the world has changed in 40 years.
Here's the big difference I see, right? We have the squad, we have the progressive left, but man, do they fall in line really fast with the establishment Democrats. The Republicans hate the Republican Party. I love pulling up these polls, but we go to Civics, and you can take a look at their polling. It's like Democrat Party sentiment. And it's like, 60% of people, or I think they're viewed unfavorably, but like 40% view them favorably. Among Democrat voters, it's like 80% favor the Democratic Party. Among Republicans, favorability for the Republican Party, it's like 50-something%, because like Republicans don't like the Republican Party. I think that right there from that polling shows that they're ready to make a big movement, right? A big change, that we're going to see a bunch of right populists primary a bunch of Republicans and then change. We'll see. There's been a lot of talk about that.
I think that the energy is out there to do that. What is lacking is probably the organization. So something that's been really interesting, and again, this was in my Examiner article I reported, was that there are some Republican politicians now who are saying they will not take tech money. Like if a tech lobbyist or a PAC, wants to throw them a fundraiser or give them money, they will not take it. The Heritage Foundation, which is the most establishment, voice on the right, recently said they will no longer take any more tech money. Now, does that mean that the Heritage Foundation is completely going with the populists against the establishment? I don't think so. Policy-wise, they haven't changed that much. But it does tell me that there's a sea change in thinking among their constituency and among the party about their relationship to corporate America, to where they actually said there's actually one corporate sector, at least, that they're not going to be taking money from anymore. That's a huge change from what the Heritage Foundation would have been saying 10 years ago. So I think there's a lot of this base sentiment on the Republican right that a lot of their politicians have not been standing up for their people, have not been standing up for their bases. It just needs to be organized, right? A lot of what people like me on the left were doing years ago in terms of organizing and changing the way that the parties kind of address these issues and tackle them needs to happen on the right. And I think, honestly, a lot of the people who've been controlling the policy arena on the right are just they're very narrow band of people. A lot of them work for Ronald Reagan or in that administration, right? I think when a new generation of people takes over, they may be thinking a little bit differently, and I think you're starting to see that when you look at races like Joe Kent's out in Washington State, where he's running a primary, or J.D. Vance running in Ohio. I think that these people see the Republican Party's relationship to governance very differently. They think that the Republican Party needs to be defending the interests of the base first and foremost, including by using state action if necessary, rather than adhering to a sense of principles or certain tenets about limited role of government, irregardless of what's happening to the base or the constituencies of the voters.
Yeah, why is it that Bernie Sanders folds so quick though, right? And I don't mean him specifically. I just mean we look at 2016. You got Bernie and you got Trump, the insurgent candidates. Trump said, "Excuse me, no," kicks the door in, says, "I refuse," and takes over. Bernie says, "I'll say whatever you want, Hillary." And then the progressives come in and they're like, "Yeah, whatever the establishment wants."
The funny thing is, as effectively as somebody like a Hillary Clinton red baited Bernie Sanders in 2016 campaign cycle and so on and so forth, I do think that Bernie is fundamentally a team player, right? Like he's someone who has certain policy priorities that he works for day and night, and he feels like if he can move the ball a little bit on them, he's willing to work with just about anyone. That's always been kind of the way that he's addressed his relationship to the Democratic Party, even though he's an independent. And I think it was highly predictable, given the way that he operated in Congress in the 1990s. I mean, let's remember, when Newt Gingrich was running Congress, the member of Congress who passed the most amendments was Bernie Sanders, right? Bernie and Newt are diametrically opposed from each other in many ways. And of course, the Republicans were holding Congress, but Bernie Sanders was very, very good at working with House Republicans even and getting their votes on amendments where he felt like maybe they agreed with them on some corporate welfare issues or some individual liberty issues. And I think that, Bernie, despite, maybe he's not that great at telling this story about himself on the campaign trail, but I think within Congress, people realize that he's actually a fairly pragmatic figure. He's not really the revolutionary that I think he often was portrayed in his campaigns, or some of his base or his really tough fans really think he is. So
yeah, actually, I think it was the world's socialist website called Bernie Sanders a nationalist capitalist, and they were like, he is not a socialist, he does not support us, he is a nationalist who is for closed borders and border barriers, and he is a capitalist who wants business to make money. He's just somewhat more left. That was funny. Thanks for checking out this clip from the Timcast IRL podcast. If you want to see the full show, come back to this channel, youtube.com/TimcastIRL, Monday through Friday at 8 p.m., where you can leave comments and super chat, and we actually will read your comments on the show. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and if you want exclusive members-only content, segments you can't get anywhere else, go to timcast.com, become a member, and we even have full bonus episodes. Thanks for hanging out, and we'll see you all next time.